Hey guys, finally getting back to this set. Some of you may remember I got it a few years back. I can't remember now, 5, 6, 7 years ago. There was an ad on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace. Someone had inherited a small house and they were cleaning out the attic and they found a bunch of old TVs. It turned out to actually be one of those Sears mail order TVs. So the only time I got to go inside of one of them, it was kind of a trip. Definitely a very, very budget-minded house. But somebody had squirreled away a number of old 1940s and 50s televisions, and I grabbed, I don't know, half a dozen, and this was definitely the best of the lot. There was also a Motorola set, a Philco set, as I recall, Bakelite Admiral with cracked cabinet. But anyways, we're going to talk about this. When I got all the sets, they all went straight into storage, and I've never done anything with any of them, other than I think I recorded a brief video and took some photos as I was putting them away into storage. Well, in keeping with the year of big things where I want to get to more interesting projects, I pulled this guy out. So it's an Emerson TV. I've worked on a few of them and I have a few others. I've shown bits and pieces over the years. And this was an interesting lineup that they had in the late 40s because they had basically 3 cabinet styles. You get the traditional veneered plywood boxy cabinet like most vendors had. They also had a cool Bakelite cabinet. I think they're one of the few, aside from Admiral, which had a bunch of Bakelite, from little 7-inch sets to tabletop to full-on standalone consoles, and a huge Bakelite cabinet. Emerson also did, and I do have one, and we're going to talk about that one in a bit. And I also have the boxier veneered type. They all have similar chassis, and I had planned on working on all of them basically at the same time. But what I really want to focus on with this one is the cabinet. I picked up some refinishing supplies last year, the year before. They were on sale. I think at Klingspor. I got some hide glue. I got a bunch of Mohawk toner lacquers, clear lacquers. I got more clamps. But I never got around to doing anything last year, probably because the weather was so miserable. It's hot and humid all summer. I'm somewhat at the mercy of the weather because I tend to spray outside or in the garage. But this year I definitely want to get to some, so I chose this. Now this is a very nice cabinet because they outsourced it to a company called Ingraham, who did a number of radio cabinets for Emerson and perhaps others. This is the only Ingraham TV cabinet I know of, and it's definitely a cut above the usual. So not only do we have all these nice curves to it, I think some of this is solid wood rather than veneered, and it's certainly very nice figured. This is veneered, book matched, and it's got the nice curve here, even around the screen. I think these are bits of real wood. Now, it's also a cool set because it's an AM, FM radio, and a TV with these rather unique vertical dials on the other side, also done very nicely with all this woodwork. Now, rather than stripping and refinishing the cabinet, I'm pretty darn sure I can touch this up. That's certainly where I'm going to start. There's lacquer, and it's deteriorated. At first I thought this was some damage, but it's to the wood underneath, but it's actually just deteriorated lacquer, and boy, nice inlays there too. There's some toner lacquer along the bottom that's chipped off. Try touching that up. But what I want to try doing on the bulk of it is what I've done before, which is to clean it, some Gojo type pumice-free hand cleaner to get off all the grime, get this paint off, lightly sand it and clear coat over it, new lacquer over the old lacquer, melt into it. And the electronics we'll get to at some point, but I want to focus on the cabinet work. So, I am going to pull the chassis out here in the garage. I don't think I have the back for it, or the high voltage box cover. I will pull out the service info and talk about it a bit, because there's something rather odd about the electronic design of the power supply in this set. But I want to bring this cabinet inside and start cleaning it up and see what we can do with it. Alright, here we are down in the workshop. I've been checking the cabinet for any loose joints, separating veneer, and it's all pretty tight, so I'm going to get right to cleaning it first off, get a better idea of what I'm working with. It certainly appears to be faded on top compared to the side, but it could just also be a layer of dirt. So to do that, I'm going to use this hand cleaner. Never use the stuff with pumice in it. This is just, well, goo. I don't know exactly what's in this stuff, but I do know it removes dirt, oil, wax, etc. without harming any finish. So we're going to get this on there and work it in. Traditionally I use Gojo, but that's not as available in my area as it used to be. So we'll go with this fast orange stuff. Used it before, works the same way. Put it on, smear it around, let it sit a while, wipe it off, repeat if necessary. Also, as soon as you put it on, you get some idea of what we have to look forward to. Pretty. Now, these vent slits are a great feature, but they're also a pain when it comes to cleaning and refinishing. There's a screen on the other side. I'm going to want to get in there and remove the screen because I will be spraying lacquer on this at some point. I don't want to get it on that. And I'm just going to have to deal with cleaning out the slots. As I slop this around, it's going to get down in there. But let's start with the large areas first. I'm going to want to remove that safety glass on the inside too. Well, it goes over the screen there. Get that screen bezel out of there. Oh yeah, and the dial scales too. Could have done all that first, but I really wanted to see what this top looked like once it's cleaned. Alright, I'll let that sit a couple minutes and wipe it off. Well, that's looking a whole lot better now, isn't it? Wasn't able to get that paint blob off, though. I was hoping it would loosen up with the hand cleaner, but no. So I'm going to use an old trick. Got a single-sided blade here, and I wrap some tape around either end of it to make like a little mini plane. I'm going to slide that and hopefully pop it off, marring the finish. And there we go. And it did remove some of the finish. Unfortunately, that paint was really bonded to it. But we'll put a couple drops of some lacquer on there. We have finish loss here too, so we're going to be doing that in a few places anyways. But hey, at least we got it off. Alrighty, let's look at the front now. One of the big reasons I do not want to refinish this is we have the original decals, and they are in fine condition, so we definitely want to retain those. But of course we don't want to screw up any of this glass, so that's all got to come out, so I got to see how it's attached from behind. Safety glass is a little loose, it's been kind of rattling around. There's probably some screws that hold this in, but don't know what's holding these pieces in. It'll be a little bit trickier. Well, after this is all clean, I'm also going to then lightly sand it before I start putting on new lacquer to even things out a little bit, because there is some alligatoring. It's bulged up a little bit here too. I don't think the veneer is separated though. And then around here, something opaque was on there, so I'll get some finish that is opaque rather than translucent. You may have heard me talk about toner lacquers in the past. That's clear lacquer that's had a little bit of dye added to it, like a trans tint dye. So it adds some color, but you can see the wood grain through it, but you can also do pigmented toner. It's opaque, and that's what we want to use for this. I think that's just black. I've got some of that on hand. Mask off the cabinet, just spray it around the perimeter. Touch it up where it's all chipped up along the bottom here. that a little bit wet. So yeah, that's what I thought. The metal stripe was just not very visible because of some scuffing on the lacquer, nothing damaged on the wood underneath. I have all the dial glass and safety glass in the screen bezel safely removed, just a few screws holding all that in. And while doing so, I noticed that there was some damage inside. I found a couple pieces of wood rattling around that popped out of here. This plywood is separated a little bit here and here, and I luckily have all the pieces, just these two, so I need to glue that back together. And I'm going to use some genuine hide glue. I've been using Titebond modern wood glue for a lot of projects, but I want to give this a try, and I want to start using this more and more. It's more traditional, gives you longer assembly time as it says, and it's reversible. In other words, you can heat it up and reposition things as needed. I think it flows a bit better too, so I'm going to go with this. I'm going to squirt some down in there. This is separated a little bit. I'm going to use a little bit of cardstock to work the glue into that void, clamp it up, then clean out the inside, and then proceed. I dug up some 400 grit sandpaper. Going to start lightly sanding this. Now the areas where there was some damage, like where I popped that paint chip out, I put a little bit of shellac on there. Just use a small paintbrush to fill in some of these defects after I clean the wood to kind of seal it. I'm going to lightly sand it, and then we're going to start spraying on gloss lacquer. Spray on a couple coats, do some light sanding, spray on a couple coats until I get rid of all this alligatoring and fill in the voids. After that's all set up and cured, we're going to rub out the finish using the traditional techniques. Talk more about that when we get there. The mesh, I was starting to remove that. And I discovered something. I noticed there were a couple posts sticking down with nuts on them, and I removed those, and I'm like, hey, I wonder what was there, or why those are down there. The speaker's missing. Originally there was a speaker that mounted underneath the cabinet up in here. So we're going to have to dig up a replacement. It's probably a 4-inch speaker, maybe 5 round speaker, I think. But as far as that mesh goes, it looks like there's some small wood screws, and we can undo those, and that whole piece should come out. And there is an integral antenna inside this cabinet as well, running all around the inside. Remember, it has an FM radio too, so that would be useless these days for TV transmission. Unless I've got my own transmitter, it will work fine for FM radio reception. And we have a tube chart over there, and there is the Ingraham logo on the back. Boy, I gotta say, I'm really liking working with this hide glue. I'd used it years ago, but then switched over to using conventional modern wood glue like Titebond. But the trouble I've had with this is, one, if you want to get it into where, say, some veneer is lifted up, I have to dilute it with water to make it thin enough to flow in. Then the water soaks into the wood, which makes it swell up. Doesn't happen with the hide glue. It's already quite thin. It's sticky, but it's thin, and you can work it in pretty easily, in and around and under stuff, and it doesn't swell the wood up. And it's very easy to position these chipped out bits into place, and just light clamping, and then that is just perfectly flat, flush, even, really nice. Now the downside is with hide glue, and the reason really few people use it these days, is it's sensitive to moisture. If it gets humid and hot, it starts to fail, which is what happens with these old cabinets, and that's why the veneer starts separating. But on the plus side, you can use heat and moisture to reactivate the glue and to push it back down, and if you're lucky, you can re-adhere it. So, you know, it kind of depends on what you're trying to do and what the application is. But in this case, yeah, it really worked out well. And I have another project coming up that needs extensive cabinet repair and clamping, so that's why I wanted to practice a little bit. I removed half a dozen or so screws on the inside and removed the interior screen, speaker board, speaker attached on the one side. I don't know what the experience was like, but we're going to find out eventually, to have a speaker on one side towards the back pointing up. Not the usual placement for a speaker. Alright, with that out of the way, I'm getting a little more aggressive with sanding in this area, using a sanding block, just some 220 grit wrapped around it to go over this back area where it's a little bit rougher. And after a little bit more sanding, I'm going to go outside and hit it up with some shellac to seal it. It's a great universal sealer. If there's any kind of contamination on this that wouldn't allow lacquer to bond well, the shellac will take care of that. And dries in minutes, as they say, and so on. Typically I've been buying these spray cans, but I just ordered up some shellac powder or flake that you can mix with denatured alcohol to make your own solution, and I'm going to be using that to touch up some of these dinged areas. What I had been doing so far is to just take some of that and spray it into the lid and use a small brush and dab it on, but I think it makes a lot more sense to just order up some shellac flake, widely available. Get in different colors. I chose clear because I don't want to add any color to this, although I did notice where I put on some shellac here, it looks a little darker than the rest, which I was not expecting, but oh well. I'm doing the top first, well, one, because I think it seemed to have the most damage to it, but I also want to get a feel for this cabinet before I go on to the front, which of course is the most complex part, and where we have the decals and all that. I want to get kind of a little more experience with this cabinet before I dive into that, and the sides should be really easy. We do have a little bit of veneer loss down here in the corner, unfortunately. We'll try to splice something in down there. Alrighty, brought the cabinet outside and just hit the top with some shellac. I think it's looking a whole heck of a lot better already. Yeah, it's a little bit darker here. I don't know why. All I can think is that the bare wood was exposed to the environment for a while, which may have darkened it. I'm not concerned about that. If I really was, I'd strip the whole thing down, try to bleach the discoloration out, and refinish the whole thing, but not going there yet. Alright, so it's a bit warm, it's a bit humid. This is going to take a little while to cure up, so while that's sitting, why don't we take a look at the chassis finally. Hey, Shads. Alright, so here's the chassis. Fairly conventional 10-inch magnetically deflected set. Typical arrangement, 6BG6 horizontal output tube, flyback. I think it's the same type used in early RCA and Admiral sets. 1B3 rectifier. Damper tube. Where's that hiding? Is it one of these guys? They look kind of short for it. Oh, it's probably 6W4. And then probably 6SN7 horizontal oscillator. So that's all conventional enough. One thing that's a bit different, of course, is the addition of a radio. So we've got an AM loop antenna here. Kind of deteriorating. I'll secure that. And there's the variable cap for it down in there. Get a little light down there. And for the FM, I imagine they have the tuner for the TV do double duty. Kind of odd looking the way it's angled like that. It is some sort of continuous tuner. We'll explore that more when we get to it. I'm not sure if it has movable slugs or there are variable caps down below or how exactly that works. But the one thing I wanted to point out that's a little bit different, it threw me for a little bit, because it has a power transformer, right? But every single electrolytic capacitor is insulated from the chassis. So that, and they're covered in cardboard. So that guy, that guy, that guy, that guy. which you typically see in a hot chassis set, which this is not, sort of. And I looked at the schematic and I saw what they did. It's annoying potentially, but I get why they did it. All right, service info. Sam's Photo Effect would be nice because they should have a components locator, but they never created one. They just had a one-page preliminary schematic and left it at that. There is an Emerson Wallace Teleaid, which I might have somewheres around here. It certainly exists. I haven't found it yet. But what I do have is the Rider's info in volume 4, which I believe is a reprint of the Emerson factory service info. And this chassis was in 4 different models. 621 with a conventional cabinet, a couple console models, and there is my 628. Not the greatest quality scans. It looks all black, but that is what I have. And what I want to talk a little bit about are the controls and the power supply. I was thinking this might be a continuous tuner without having taken a good look at the chassis, but it's not quite. It looks deceptive though, because on the right hand side we've got that glass window with the vertical scale and a pointer that moves up and down with the tuning. On the left hand side we have AM FM radio with a selector over there. But it turns out that this uses a conventional clunker and they ran a dial string to it. So when you change channels, that needle is going to jump between those numbers. It's not going to be a smooth motion. And the AM FM is a completely separate add-on radio. Other sets like Dumont, notably, has a continuous tuner that does both TV and FM in one smooth motion. This set is not like that. Basically, it's a conventional TV, and they tacked on an AM/FM radio chassis on the side of it, and they don't share any circuitry. Okay, going down through this power supply. So we'd noted all the electrolytic capacitors are isolated from the chassis, but it has a power transformer. So why would they do that? Well, we can jump to the schematic, but that can be a little hard to decipher, so we'll jump back to another diagram they kindly provided in a moment. But let's take a quick walk through this. So here's our power plug. AC interlock, power switch, primary, secondary, power transformer. We have 2 6.3 volt windings. One side of one of the 6.3 volt filament windings goes to ground, the other does not. It goes to the center tap of the secondary, which seems odd, but I hope it'll make some sense in a moment. And then we have a full wave rectifier with 5U4, and here is our highest potential coming out here. And here we have a couple electrolytics, a filter choke, another electrolytic, focus coil, and more electrolytics. A whole lot of filtering going on. It keeps going. More power resistors, more electrolytics. So here are all those caps that are isolated on top of the chassis. So well-filtered power supply. But this line down here is not ground. Yeah, look close because they show a little ground symbol here, but there's a capacitor between the two. This goes to that center tap. It does not go to ground, not directly. If we look at these power resistors, and those are those big ones on top of the chassis, high-powered tapped power resistors. If we look at this line, it goes up here through a resistor, resistor, resistor to ground. And if we follow this ground back, resistor, 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 over here through focus and whatnot, eventually it comes back to this. So both sides of this go through power resistors to ground. And the way this works is this center line here is kind of halfway through the power supply. So let's say it's a 300 volt power supply. This line here is about 150 volts with reference to ground. Why would they do that? Because typically in these TVs, the power tubes, your sweep tubes, horizontal output tube, the vertical output tube need more need a higher plate supply. So that'd be, say, your 300 volts. But the IF tubes, the tuner tubes, the small signal miniature tubes need lower voltage, like 150. So they could have just had this going to ground here and then had some huge power resistors and burn off a lot of energy and have taps. But according to their design notes, doing it like this, where the center tap is riding at 150 and power resistors on either side, it was more efficient and they could use a smaller power transformer. Okay. Now back to this. Why the difference? Well, it turns out for the tubes that use the lower voltage, I do believe, whether you say running at 150 on the plate supply, they would use this for the filament supply because the cathode in those, I might have that backwards. We'll see in a moment. OYP. No, I got that right. So if we look at the lower power tubes, like here's the IF tubes, here's the filaments. See, one side of the filament goes to ground, the other side goes to that. There is a rating on tubes about the maximum voltage between the heater and the cathode. And it's not that high. It might be 50 volts, 100 volts, something like that. So you want the difference between these two to not be that great. And since this cathode goes through a little resistor to ground, the cathode's going to be pretty close to ground potential, so you'd want to use a filament supply that has one side of it grounded. The power tubes, like the 6BG6 output, follow the cathode on that, goes through a resistor to this rail, which is not ground. So it uses the YP, which is this, where one side of the filament goes to the center tap. A little confusing to trace it out in here, but they do include a simplified diagram. Let's take a look at that. Here we go. And they show the power transformer, some of the filter caps, those power resistors, the rectifier tube, and here's a simplified diagram. So there's ground, and then we work our way up. They say in TV mode, this point will be 320 volts, 235 volts, 180, 125, but it's going to ground. And then 74 and 125 down here. And they show this point as being 0 volts or B minus. So I think these voltages, when they say 125, it's with reference to this, which means 125 volt supply here and a 125 there, which is also ground. So the ground is running at about 125 with reference to B minus. So they're making use of, they're feeding some circuits from either side of this and some across the whole thing. Now I think about it, that's actually similar to the way house wiring is done in the United States, where people think of us as having, say, 120 volt outlets, but some appliances run on 240. So how do they do that? Well, really, what's going into your house is three-phase, and like half your house is on one side and half is on the other, but some things go across the outermost points. So some things are 240, some are 120 on half of it, and some are 120 on the other. This is a similar arrangement. If it doesn't make sense to you now, maybe you will as the project proceeds. I looked through this, looked at the parts list, ordered up a few things I didn't have on hand. It's pretty conventional. Well, the capacitor values are all very common. The electrolytics all very common. I think a bunch of 10 microfarad and a whole mess of 40s. I always keep a lot of 47 microfarad, 450 volt electrolytics on hand. I think the only one I didn't have is this 80 at 200. So we'll be able to dig into this soon. I'll use Adaptacaps to replace all those. It's kind of filthy, but we'll get it cleaned up. But for now, let's continue on with the cabinet.